He was a man who carried more weight on his shoulders than anyone around him could see. From the outside, he looked like just another ordinary father walking through life. But behind his quiet smile was a story of survival, pain, and love. He was a black single dad, raising his little daughter all by himself. Every day was a new challenge, but no matter how hard it got, he refused to give up. His daughter was his reason for breathing, and for her, he was ready to fight the whole world. His mornings always started before the sun came up. While most people were still asleep, he was already awake, making sure his daughter had something warm to eat before school. Sometimes it was just toast with peanut butter or cereal when the fridge was nearly empty, but he served it with love, and to her that was enough. He would pack her small school bag with care, slipping in a note that read, "Daddy loves you," because he wanted her to never forget that truth, even when life felt heavy. After she left for school, his own race began. He worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3 when bills piled up. One shift might be stacking boxes in a warehouse, the other driving long hours in the evenings. His body was always tired, his back ached, his eyes burned from lack of sleep, but he pushed through. He didn't have the luxury to rest. Every dollar mattered. Rent, groceries, school supplies, everything depended on him. There was no one else to lean on. When he walked home late at night, sometimes he would pass by families sitting together in restaurants or see couples laughing in coffee shops. A quiet ache would rise in his chest. He had once dreamed of that kind of life. Love, support, a partner to share the weight with. But life had chosen differently for him. The mother of his child had left years ago, leaving only a note and a silence that still echoed inside him. At first he was angry, even broken, but when he looked into his daughter's innocent eyes, he promised himself he would never walk away like that. She would never know abandonment. She would always know her father's love. Money was always short and the pressure never seemed to end. There were days when he had to decide between paying the electricity bill or buying enough groceries for the week. On the worst days, he would eat less just to make sure his daughter had enough. Sometimes he would sit in the dark after putting her to bed, staring at the overdue bills, wondering how much longer he could keep going like this. But then he would hear her soft breathing from the other room and it gave him strength. For her, he would endure it all. Despite his struggles, he made sure his daughter never felt the storm he was fighting. He laughed with her, told her bedtime stories, and clapped proudly at her school plays even if he had rushed straight from work with grease still on his hands. On weekends, when there was a little time, he took her to the park. They couldn't afford fancy trips or toys, but they had something better, moments filled with laughter, games, and love. To her, he was not just a father, but her hero. Still, inside, he battled loneliness and exhaustion. There were nights he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, asking himself if he was doing enough, if his daughter would grow up resenting the things he couldn't give her. Doubt often crept in, whispering cruel thoughts. Yet every morning he rose again, determined to silence those doubts with action. His love for her was louder than his fear. People around him rarely noticed the battles he was fighting. Neighbors saw him as quiet and hardworking, but no one truly knew how much he carried alone. Sometimes he wished someone would ask how he was doing, but he had learned not to expect help. The world didn't pause for struggling fathers like him. He had become his own soldier, fighting daily wars in silence. Even in his exhaustion, he found small joys, watching his daughter's eyes light up when she showed him a drawing from school, hearing her giggle when he told one of his corny jokes, feeling her little arms wrapped tightly around his neck when she whispered, "I love you, Daddy." Those moments gave him the courage to keep moving forward. They reminded him that even if the world didn't see his worth, she did. Every day was a test, but every day he passed it with love. He was a man with scars, both seen and unseen, yet he carried them with pride. Because each scar was proof that he had not given up, proof that he had chosen to stand tall for the little girl who looked up to him. Life had tried to break him, but instead, it shaped him into something stronger, a father who loved with every piece of his soul. And though he never admitted it out loud, there were times he wondered how much longer he could bear the weight alone. The loneliness, the exhaustion, the endless struggle. They often pushed him to the edge of despair. Yet fate had something unexpected waiting for him. On one ordinary night when his own spirit was heavy, he would meet someone standing at the edge of life itself. And in saving her, he would discover something new about himself. That sometimes, the greatest strength is found not just in surviving your own pain, but in reaching out to save someone else from theirs. The night was heavy, and so was his heart. After another long shift at the warehouse, his boots dragged across the cracked pavement as he headed toward home. The air was cold, sharp enough to sting his cheeks, but he barely noticed. His mind was somewhere else, tangled in the knots of worry that seemed to grow tighter with each passing day. Rent was due in a week. The fridge was half empty, and his daughter's shoes had grown too small again. She never complained, but he saw the way her toes pressed against the front. He promised her he'd get new ones soon, though he wasn't sure how. His jacket was thin, but it wasn't the kind of cold you could fix with fabric. It was the cold of carrying too much, of always being tired, of being the only one to stand between life's storms and a little girl who trusted him completely. He adjusted the strap of his worn backpack on his shoulder, thinking about the sandwich inside wrapped in foil. It wasn't for him. It was for her, saved from his break at work. He told his co-workers he wasn't hungry, but the truth was that he'd rather her have something extra for tomorrow's lunch. The streets were quiet at this hour. Only the occasional car passed, headlights sweeping across the dark as if searching for something. He walked alone, the sound of his footsteps echoing faintly against the concrete walls. In the distance, the bridge rose above the city lights, a structure he had crossed countless times before. Normally, it was just part of his routine, another stretch of road that brought him closer to home. But tonight, that bridge would become something else, something unforgettable. He pulled his jacket tighter as a gust of wind rushed past, rattling the loose metal signs and carrying with it the faint smell of the river below. The world felt unusually still, almost too still, as if it were holding its breath. He tried to push away the feeling and focused instead on his daughter. He pictured her curled up under the blankets at home, hugging the worn teddy bear she never let go of. The thought made him smile, even through the weight pressing down on him. She was the reason he kept moving, step after step, no matter how heavy those steps felt. As he approached the bridge, something caught his eye. At first, he thought it was just the shadows playing tricks in the dim light of the street lamps. But then he noticed a figure, a person, standing dangerously close to the railing. His pace slowed, his brow furrowed. The figure wasn't just leaning. They were gripping the cold metal bars as if it was the only thing holding them to this world. His heart began to pound. In that single instant, fatigue vanished. His worries about bills, food, and rent fell silent. All he saw was a human life balanced on the edge of ending. He squinted through the dark and saw that it was a woman, young, her shoulders trembling under the weight of a burden he could almost feel from where he stood. He froze for a moment, unsure if she had seen him yet. Part of him wondered if he should approach or if his presence might scare her into moving faster toward the edge. But another part of him, the stronger part, knew he couldn't keep walking. He couldn't just pass by and pretend he hadn't seen. He thought of his daughter again. What if one day it was her standing there alone and broken? Wouldn't he pray for someone, anyone, to stop and reach out? The world around him seemed to blur as his focus locked on her. He could hear the faint sound of her sobs carried by the wind. It was a sound that pierced through him, a sound of hopelessness he knew all too well. Though his struggles were different, he recognized the weight of wanting to give up. He had felt it himself on those long nights when everything seemed too much. That was why his next step wasn't one of hesitation, but of instinct. He took a deep breath and moved forward slowly, his voice soft yet firm as it carried across the cold night air. He didn't want to startle her, but he needed her to hear him. "Don't leap," he said, the words slipping out with more force than he expected. It wasn't just a plea. It was a command spoken from the depths of his soul. For a second, she didn't move. Her grip on the railing tightened and her head turned slightly as if she wasn't sure the voice was real. He stepped closer, his hands open, his eyes locked on her. In that moment, all the exhaustion in his bones disappeared. He wasn't just a tired father walking home from work. He was a man standing at the crossroads of life and death, and someone's future was in his hands. The bridge that had always been just part of his walk home had now become the stage of a story that would change everything. The weight of his own struggles hadn't gone away, but for the first time they no longer felt like chains. They felt like fuel, giving him the words, the strength, and the courage to reach out to another soul on the edge. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He couldn't let her fall. She didn't hear his footsteps at first. The night had swallowed every sound, leaving only the faint rush of the river below and the muffled sobs escaping her trembling lips. Her body shook, Not only from the cold wind that whipped across the bridge, but from the storm inside her chest. She clung to the railing with white-knuckled hands, staring down at the dark water that seemed to call her name. It promised silence. It promised an end to the endless pain. Her mind replayed the failures she couldn't escape. The job she lost after months of struggling to keep up. The family who turned away when she needed them most. The friends who stopped calling when her sadness became too heavy to carry. She felt invisible, forgotten, as if the world had already moved on without her. And tonight, standing on that bridge, she believed it would be easier for everyone if she disappeared. The tears blurred her vision, but she didn't bother wiping them away. Each drop fell into the wind and vanished, much like she wished to vanish herself. She wanted someone, anyone, to notice her pain, but when people passed her in the streets earlier, they looked away. She had smiled for years, pretending she was fine, but smiles couldn't hold back the weight forever. And now, here she was, ready to let go. But then a voice broke through the night, strong yet gentle, simple words yet heavy with meaning. "Don't leap." Her entire body jolted as if those two words carried electricity. She turned slightly startled, her tear-filled eyes searching the shadows. And there he was, a man, tall and tired-looking, his face worn but kind, his eyes fixed on her with a mixture of fear and determination. He didn't look like a stranger passing by. He looked like someone who understood. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Her throat tightened, her chest heaved, and her grip on the railing tightened even more. "Go away," she whispered hoarsely, barely audible over the wind. She didn't want to be stopped. Or maybe she did, but pride and pain made her push against the one lifeline being offered. He didn't go away. He stepped closer, cautiously, careful not to make any sudden movements that might frighten her. "I can't," he said softly, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "Not while you're standing there. Not while you're hurting." Her tears spilled harder. No one had said that to her before. Not like that. Most people either ignored her pain or told her to just be strong, as if it were that simple. But this man's words were different. They weren't polished or rehearsed. They were raw, spoken with the conviction of someone who knew exactly how it felt to be close to the edge. She shook her head, choking back a sob. "You don't understand." But he did. He really did. And she could see it in his eyes. The exhaustion, the weight, the battles he carried inside but never showed the world. "I do," he said quietly, taking another step forward. "More than you think." Her legs trembled, her fingers tightening painfully around the railing. The cold metal bit into her skin, but she clung to it like it was her last anchor. She wanted to believe him, but part of her still doubted. Why would a stranger care? Why would anyone stop for her? She was nobody, and yet here he was. A man who could have kept walking. A man who had his own problems written all over the lines of his tired face. But instead of leaving, he stayed. Instead of turning away, he leaned closer, his voice carrying warmth into the freezing air. "Look at me," he urged softly. His tone was not commanding, but pleading. Slowly, hesitantly, she turned her head. Their eyes met under the flickering streetlight. His were deep and steady, filled not with pity but with genuine concern. She saw no judgment there, only understanding. In that gaze, something inside her cracked. It wasn't much, just a small shift, but it was enough. Enough to remind her that maybe she wasn't completely invisible. Enough to remind her that maybe, just maybe, her cry for help hadn't gone unheard after all. The silence between them stretched, broken only by her uneven breathing, and the wind whistling through the metal beams of the bridge. He didn't rush her, didn't push her with empty words like, "It'll be okay." Instead, he stood grounded, waiting, ready to catch her if she let go. His presence alone was louder than 100 speeches. She lowered her gaze to the river again, her heart pounding. She wasn't ready to step away, not yet. The pain inside her still screamed louder than his words. But the fact that he was there, that someone cared enough to stop and speak, planted the smallest seed of doubt in her plan. For the first time that night, she wasn't entirely certain she wanted to jump. And though she couldn't admit it, though her lips trembled with resistance, her heart whispered something her mind refused to believe. Maybe this stranger wasn't just a passerby. Maybe he was meant to be here. Maybe his words were more than just a plea. They were an answer to the silent cry she had been sending out for far too long. He didn't plan on being a hero that night. He was just a tired father on his way home, his mind cluttered with unpaid bills and the weight of tomorrow's responsibilities. But when he saw her gripping the railing, something inside him shifted instantly. It wasn't logic that moved him forward. It was instinct. A father's instinct. The same force that made him rush to his daughter's side when she cried out in the night. The same force that told him to protect, to save, to hold on when everything else wanted to let go. As he stood just a few steps away, his heart thundered in his chest. He thought about his little girl sleeping soundly at home, unaware that her father was standing on a bridge trying to keep another soul from shattering. He knew that if this young woman jumped, if he let her slip away, her absence would ripple outwards, breaking hearts and leaving wounds that might never heal. He had lived enough to know that every life mattered to someone, and in that moment it mattered to him. His voice trembled slightly, but his words carried a strength he didn't know he had. "Please," he said gently, his hand reaching forward but stopping just short of touching her. He didn't want to frighten her. "I know what it feels like to want to give up. I've been there. But you're not alone tonight. I'm here." The wind howled around them, tugging at his jacket, tossing her hair wildly across her tear-streaked face. She shook her head violently, clutching the railing even tighter. "You don't know me. You don't know what I've lost," she cried, her voice raw and cracked like glass about to break. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. "You're right," he admitted softly. "I don't know your pain, but I know pain. I know what it's like to feel invisible, to feel like no one would notice if you were gone. I fight those thoughts every day, but I stay because of my daughter. And tonight I'm staying for you too." For a moment she froze. His words cut through the noise in her head like a small beam of light breaking into a dark room. She turned her head slightly, her eyes narrowing, scanning his face as if trying to decide whether to believe him. And when she saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the kind that only comes from carrying too much for too long, something inside her shifted. He wasn't just saying words. He meant them. He took another step closer, slow and careful. "You're not standing there by accident," he said, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. "I was meant to walk this way tonight. I was meant to see you, and I can't walk home and leave you here, not when I know I can try to help." She trembled, torn between the overwhelming urge to let go and the fragile thread of hope that his presence was weaving back into her. The river roared below, promising silence, but his words anchored her to the moment. Her grip loosened just slightly, her fingers trembling as she looked back at him. He noticed. Every small movement, every flicker of hesitation, he noticed it all. His body leaned forward, his hand inching closer, though he still held back from grabbing her. "I know you feel like the world doesn't care," he whispered. "But I care. Right now I care, and maybe that's enough for tonight." She bit her lip, her chest rising and falling in rapid breaths. A part of her wanted to believe him. A part of her wanted to release all the pain and collapse into the safety his words seemed to offer. But fear held her back. Fear that she was too broken, too far gone to be saved. He recognized that fear. He had felt it himself on nights when despair wrapped around him like chains, and so he gave her what he always told his daughter, truth simple and unpolished. "You don't have to fight for the rest of your life tonight," he said. "You just have to fight for this moment. Just stay for this moment. With me." Those words seemed to reach her. Her body shook harder, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. Slowly, almost painfully, her knuckles loosened on the railing. She turned fully toward him now, her face twisted in anguish, but her eyes searching, desperate, clinging to the lifeline he offered. In that instant, he moved, not with force but with certainty. He extended his hand, his palm open, steady, unwavering. "Take my hand," he said softly. "Let me hold on for you until you're ready to hold on for yourself." Her gaze flicked from the dark river below to his outstretched hand. Her heart screamed at her to let go, but her soul whispered something else. "Try just one more time." And with a trembling breath she reached out. When their fingers touched, it was as if the world paused. The city lights flickered, the wind quieted, and the roar of the river dulled beneath the sound of her sobs. He wrapped his hand firmly around hers, his grip strong and unyielding. He pulled her gently, slowly, away from the edge, his own breath ragged with relief. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't holding on to a cold, lifeless railing. She was holding on to another human being, and that was enough to keep her standing. For a long second, neither of them spoke. Their hands were locked together, his grip firm and steady, hers trembling like a leaf caught in a storm. The cold night pressed around them, the wind whipping at their faces, but in that fragile moment, the world seemed to shrink until it was only the two of them. one man refusing to let go, and one woman teetering between despair and survival. Her chest rose and fell in ragged bursts, each breath carrying the weight of years of hidden pain. She wanted to pull back, to run from the vulnerability of being seen so completely. But the warmth of his hand against hers anchored her in a way she hadn't felt in so long. It was a reminder that she wasn't entirely gone, not yet. He studied her carefully, his eyes searching her face. He could see the storm inside her, the doubt, the fear, the exhaustion, and he knew words alone wouldn't save her. This wasn't about lectures or promises of a brighter future. It was about this one fragile instant, about holding her here until the edge no longer felt like an option. "You're brave," he whispered, his voice steady, carrying a quiet conviction. Her brows furrowed, disbelief flashing across her tear-streaked face. "Brave?" she echoed, her voice cracking. "I'm standing here trying to end it all." "What's brave about that?" He shook his head gently. "No. What's brave is that you're still here even with everything you're carrying. What's brave is letting someone see your pain instead of hiding it. What's brave is reaching for my hand right now even when it feels impossible." Her eyes burned as fresh tears spilled over. No one had ever told her that before. People called her weak, broken, or too emotional, but never brave. The word wrapped around her like a fragile thread of hope, weaving through the cracks of her despair. Still, she shook her head, her grip faltering as she glanced back toward the water below. "I can't do this anymore. I'm tired, so tired." He tightened his hold, his thumb brushing gently against her knuckles. "I know," he said softly. "I know what tired feels like. I know what it's like to wonder if tomorrow is even worth it. But listen to me, tired doesn't mean finished. You don't have to give up tonight. You just have to give yourself one more chance." Her sobs grew heavier, her body collapsing under the weight of his words. She felt the truth in them, even as her mind tried to resist. For so long, she had been fighting battles in silence, convincing herself no one cared. But here was this man, a stranger, fighting for her as if her life mattered more than his own exhaustion, his own struggles. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly, her voice small, almost childlike. "Why do you care?" The question hit him hard, but he didn't hesitate with his answer. His eyes glistened as he thought of his daughter safe at home. "Because I know what it's like to feel invisible, and I promised myself that if I ever saw someone about to disappear, I'd do everything I could to hold on to them. Tonight, that's you, and I care because your life matters. Even if you don't see it right now, it does." Her lips trembled, her heart pounding with conflict. A part of her still wanted to let go, to sink into the silence of the river. But another part, small, fragile, but undeniable, wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that maybe she wasn't as invisible as she thought. The silence stretched again, heavy and tense. She closed her eyes, her body swaying slightly, and for a terrifying moment he thought she might pull away. His own chest tightened in fear. But then, with a trembling breath, she squeezed his hand back. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Relief surged through him, though he didn't let it show. Instead, he steadied his voice and said, "That's it. Just hold on, one moment at a time. You don't have to figure out the rest of your life tonight. Just this moment." The words settled deep inside her, soft but unyielding. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she felt something other than despair. It wasn't joy and it wasn't peace, but it was enough to make her pause. Enough to make her wonder if maybe she could keep breathing for one more night. Her knees buckled suddenly and she fell forward against him, her sobs breaking free in violent waves. He caught her, his arms wrapping around her like a shield. She buried her face against his chest, crying as if her body had been waiting for this release for years. He held her tightly, whispering quietly, "It's okay. Let it out. You're not alone anymore." His own eyes burned, tears threatening to spill, but he held strong for her. His strength wasn't in pretending he wasn't broken. It was in showing her that broken people could still save each other. The wind still howled, the river still rushed, but in that embrace, the bridge was no longer a place of endings. It was a place of survival, a place of courage, and though she didn't realize it yet, the choice she made in that moment to take his hand, to lean into his strength, was the first step back toward life. Her legs gave way beneath her, and in that split second he feared the worst, that she would slip from his grasp and fall into the darkness below. But his grip tightened, his arms locking around her with all the strength he had left in his tired body. He pulled not with force alone but with desperation, as if both their lives depended on it. Inch by inch he drew her away from the railing, away from the pull of the river until finally she collapsed fully against him. Her sobs tore through the night, raw and unrestrained, echoing across the steel beams of the bridge. He held her tightly, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths, his heart pounding against his ribs. For a long moment he couldn't speak. Relief washed over him in powerful waves, leaving him trembling. He hadn't realized until now just how close they had come to tragedy. "You're safe," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're safe now." She clung to him as though he were the last solid thing left in her world. Her fists curled into his jacket, her face buried against his shoulder, and she cried as if every unspoken hurt, every hidden scar had suddenly been given permission to pour out. He didn't try to stop her. He didn't tell her to calm down or hush her tears. He simply let her cry because he knew some pain couldn't be silenced, it had to be released. His own eyes burned as he looked up at the night sky. Stars were faintly visible beyond the glow of the city lights, distant but steady. He thought of his daughter again, how her little hands would reach for his when she was scared. The way her small voice would whisper, "Don't let go, Daddy." And he realized that in this moment, this young woman was like his daughter too, lost, afraid, but desperately needing someone to hold on. Her breathing came in sharp, uneven bursts against him. I can't do it anymore," she choked out between sobs. "I'm so tired of fighting. I thought no one would care if I was gone." His arms tightened around her, his jaw clenched as if holding back his own tears. "I care," he said firmly, almost fiercely. "Maybe I'm just a stranger, but tonight I care enough to fight for you when you can't fight for yourself. You don't have to carry this alone." She shook her head weakly, her tears dampening his jacket. "But I've lost everything. My job, my family, everyone left me. What's the point of staying when there's nothing left?" He pulled back slightly, just enough to look into her eyes. His own were weary, lined with years of struggle, but steady with conviction. "You think you have nothing left," he said softly. "But you still have you. And that means there's still a chance for things to change. Trust me, I know what it feels like to lose almost everything. But I learned that as long as I'm still breathing, there's hope. Even if it's small, even if it's buried deep, it's there." She stared at him, her eyes wide and wet, searching for any hint of insincerity. But all she saw was truth. He wasn't speaking from theory or pity. He was speaking from lived pain, from nights of his own despair, from years of carrying burdens too heavy for one man. And that truth pierced through her despair like a crack of light in a dark room. For the first time in a long while, she believed, just a little, that maybe survival was possible. Her sobs slowed, though her body still trembled. She leaned fully into him now, not out of desperation but out of trust, fragile and new. He adjusted his hold, steadying her as if he were cradling something precious. In his arms, she didn't feel like a burden. She felt human again. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours, with the two of them standing in the middle of the bridge. Cars moved in the distance, lights flickered in the city skyline, but here, in this suspended moment, everything else faded away. There was no noise except the sound of her tears softening into shallow breaths and his heartbeat slowing to something steadier. Finally, he spoke again, his voice gentle but grounded. "You don't have to know what comes next tonight. You don't have to solve everything in one moment. All you need to do is keep breathing, one step at a time. And I'll walk with you until you feel strong enough to stand on your own." Her lips parted as if to argue, but the words never came. Instead, she nodded faintly, the smallest flicker of acceptance showing in her eyes. It wasn't a promise of forever. It was a promise of tonight. And for him, that was enough. He eased them both down onto the cold concrete, letting her sit while still holding her hand. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering from the chill but no longer reaching for the railing. He pulled off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. She protested weakly, saying he needed it more, but he shook his head. "I've carried heavier things," he said with a faint smile. And for the first time since their paths crossed, she almost smiled too. It wasn't full, it wasn't bright, but it was something. A fragile ember flickering to life where there had only been darkness. He knew this wasn't the end of her pain. He knew the road ahead would still be difficult for both of them. But as he sat beside her, her hand still in his, he felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. Tonight she had chosen life. And that was enough to change everything. The river roared beneath the bridge, but its voice had softened now. It no longer sounded like a call. It sounded like a memory of what almost was. She sat on the cold concrete, wrapped in his jacket, her shoulders still trembling. He stayed close, not crowding her, but never letting go of her hand. The silence between them was heavy, but no longer dangerous. It wasn't the silence of despair. It was the silence of two souls catching their breath after walking too close to the edge. She finally spoke, her voice low and hoarse from crying. "You should have just kept walking. You didn't have to stop for me." He looked at her, his tired eyes steady. "Maybe I didn't have to," he admitted. "But I couldn't. Something in me wouldn't let me. Sometimes, you just know when you're supposed to be there for someone." Her lips pressed into a thin line as she turned her gaze toward the water. She wanted to argue, but deep inside she knew he was right. His presence tonight didn't feel like chance. It felt like something greater, as though fate had placed him there at exactly the moment she needed him most. Minutes passed before she spoke again. "You said you understood, that you felt this way before. How?" He inhaled slowly, the weight of his past heavy in his chest. For years he had carried his struggles quietly, shielding them even from those who might have helped. But tonight, with this broken young woman looking at him, he felt no shame in revealing the truth. "I'm a single father," he began softly. "It's just me and my daughter. Her mother left when she was little. I've been trying to raise her alone ever since. Some days I feel like I'm failing at everything, providing, protecting, being enough for her. There are nights I lie awake wondering if she'd be better off without me. I know the weight of being tired, of feeling like you can't keep going. That's why when I saw you tonight I knew what you were feeling, because I've been there too." Her eyes widened. She hadn't expected honesty so raw, so unguarded. She blinked, letting his words sink in, and for the first time she didn't feel completely alone in her suffering. "My dad," she began, then stopped, her throat tightening. "He left when I was little. I kept waiting for him to come back, but he never did. My mom tried, but she had her own battles. I guess I never really knew what it felt like to be worth staying for." Her voice broke, and he felt the words strike him deep. He thought of his own daughter asleep at home, the way she clung to him every night, the way she trusted that he would always be there. The thought of abandoning her was unbearable. And yet, here was this young woman carrying the scars of someone who had walked away. His chest tightened with a mix of sorrow and resolve. "I don't know why your father left," he said gently, "but I know what it means to stay. And tonight I'm staying with you. Not because I know you, not because I owe you anything, but because you matter. You're worth staying for." The words hit her like a wave. No one had ever said them to her, not in that way. She pressed her hand to her face, trying to hide the tears, but they came anyway. This stranger, this exhausted father, was giving her the very thing she had longed for all her life. Proof that someone believed she was worth holding on to. For a while, they just sat there, the hum of the city in the distance, the rhythm of the river below. Then slowly she began to share pieces of her story. She told him about losing her job, about the crushing debt, about the nights when the silence in her apartment felt like it was swallowing her alive. She told him about how her friends had grown tired of her sadness, drifting away one by one, leaving her to battle the darkness alone. He listened without interruption, nodding occasionally, his expression never shifting to pity. He didn't treat her like she was fragile glass about to shatter. He treated her like she was human, deserving of every word she spoke. When she paused, wiping her face with the back of her hand, he finally spoke. "My daughter goes to school nearby," he said, his voice soft but tinged with something almost amused. "The other day she came home talking about a teacher's aide who helped her with her reading. She said this lady told her she was smart and that she should never give up. She couldn't stop smiling when she told me, 'That lady, was it you?'" Her breath caught, her eyes widened, and for a moment she was speechless. Then she nodded slowly. "Yes, that was me. I didn't know she was your daughter." He let out a shaky laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. "You see? You don't even realize the difference you've made. She looks up to you. You gave her hope. And now tonight it's my turn to remind you you're needed. You're part of someone's story even when you don't see it." Her lips trembled and fresh tears filled her eyes. But this time they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of realization. She had mattered to someone even if she hadn't known it. The connection between them no longer felt like coincidence. It felt like destiny. In that unexpected link, in the crossing of their lives, something shifted. The bridge was no longer just the place she almost ended her story. It became the place she discovered she was already part of someone else's hope. The bridge stood silent now, its steel frame gleaming faintly under the moonlight. The river still surged below, dark and restless, but the thread it once held had faded. On the concrete, two lives sat side by side, no longer strangers, but two souls bound by a night that would never be forgotten. She sat quietly, wrapped in his jacket, her face pale and streaked with tears. Her eyes, though red and swollen, no longer looked hollow. They carried something fragile, something she thought she had lost forever, a glimmer of possibility. He sat beside her, his body heavy with exhaustion, yet strangely lighter than it had felt in years. He had walked onto that bridge burdened by his own struggles, but he was leaving with something greater, proof that his pain could be transformed into purpose. Neither spoke for a long while. Words felt too small for what had just happened. It was enough simply to exist there together, breathing the same cold air, feeling the same quiet relief of survival. At last, she whispered, her voice shaky but sincere. "You saved me." He shook his head slowly, his gaze steady on the horizon where dawn threatened to rise. "No," he said softly. "You saved yourself. You chose to take my hand. You chose to stay." She swallowed hard, her heart tightening at his words. For so long she had believed she was powerless, a victim of circumstances beyond her control. But tonight she had made a choice to live. And though the road ahead still looked uncertain, that choice was enough to begin again. They rose slowly, their legs stiff from sitting too long in the cold. He offered his hand again, not just to steady her, but as a promise that she didn't have to walk away from this night alone. She hesitated only briefly before taking it, her grip firmer now, steadier. Together they began walking toward the other side of the bridge. The city stirred around them, the first hints of morning creeping into the sky. She glanced at him, her voice breaking the silence. "I don't know how to thank you." He smiled faintly, though his eyes carried the weight of truth. "You don't need to thank me. Just promise me something." "What?" she asked cautiously. "Promise me that you'll give yourself another chance," he said. "Promise me that when it gets hard, and it will get hard, you'll remember tonight. Remember that you're not invisible. You're not alone. And no matter what your mind tells you, your life matters." Her chest tightened, tears stinging her eyes once more. But this time she nodded without hesitation. "I promise." They walked in silence again, but it was no longer heavy or suffocating. It was the silence of two people carrying a shared truth, of two paths that had collided at the edge of despair, and now walked side by side toward something new. When they reached the end of the bridge, she stopped and turned to him. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," he replied. "Why me?" "You don't even know me. Why risk so much for a stranger?" He studied her for a moment, then sighed deeply. "Because I know what it means to have someone give up on you. And I swore I'd never let anyone feel that way if I could help it. My daughter, she's my world. She reminds me every day why I keep going. Tonight you reminded me too, that sometimes saving someone else can save a part of yourself." Her lips parted, and for a moment she couldn't find the words. All she could do was nod, feeling the truth of his statement settle into her heart. That night didn't end with grand gestures or perfect solutions. He didn't magically erase her pain, and she didn't suddenly become whole. But something far more important had happened. She had been seen. She had been reminded of her worth. And he had discovered that even in the midst of his own struggles, he had the power to give someone hope. In the weeks that followed, their lives intertwined in quiet, unexpected ways. She sought help, slowly rebuilding piece by piece, and he checked in on her, sometimes with nothing more than a text that said, "Still here?" Her answer was always the same. Yes. And one afternoon, weeks later, his daughter came home from school with a wide smile. "Daddy," she said breathlessly, "Miss Williams is back. She's helping at school again. She told me I'm smart. She told me not to give up." He looked at his daughter, his chest swelling with pride and gratitude. Later that evening, he messaged the woman whose life he had held on to that night. "See," he wrote, "you matter more than you know." She stared at the message for a long time before replying with words that trembled but carried truth. "Thank you for not letting me go. That night changed everything, and she was right. That night, on the edge of despair, two lives had collided in a way neither could have predicted. A father fighting for his daughter's future, and a woman fighting to end her pain. had met on a bridge where endings seemed certain. But instead of tragedy, they found connection. Instead of silence, they found a reason to keep going. The bridge no longer symbolized despair. For both of them, it became a place of rebirth, a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of courage happen in the quietest moments. A reminder that one stranger's choice to stop, to care, to say don't leap, could change not just one life, but two. And in that truth, their lives were forever changed.